It's time for the biggest story of the day. This is What Made the Cut with JJ and Alex on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Trajan Wealth brings you this portion of the program, TRAJANwealth.com, for all your trusted local needs in retirement. TrajanWealth.com. Evan Bland covers Nebraska football for the Omaha World-Herald. Evan, thanks for joining us, man.
You got it, guys. How's it going?
Oh, good. We're just, it's bowl season, so every day a new bowl pops up on our TV, and we go, that's today, huh? And here we are. It happened again this morning for me, but, of course, the first playoff game of the season is going to be happening tonight in less than an hour. The Nebraska football program, Nebraska facing off against Utah in the Vegas Bowl. Where is Matt Rhule's program right now? Obviously, like in the exact moment, it feels from the outside looking in that it's quite a bit of turmoil, but is it less turmoil than we think or more?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. They just hired a new defensive.
Right there.
That was a big sigh.
I mean, it's a busy time of year anyway, right? With the portal and everything, and Nebraska's former five-star quarterbacks in there, and Dylan Raiola, and so they're rolling with their freshman TJ Lateef in the bowl game, and like I said, new defensive coordinator. They've hired a couple position coaches. Still have to find a defensive line coach, and so it's sort of an end to the 25 season in the sense that Nebraska wants to prove that what happened against Penn State and Iowa when they got run over and gave up 77 points, that was sort of a fluke. But they're also very much looking ahead into next season, and they're going to be playing this game without Emmett Johnson, who was a first-team All-American running back for them, and so this is, in a lot of ways, an audition for next season, as well as maybe exactly what the plan is going to be in the transfer portal for them next month. So kind of caught somewhere in between right now, but I know they felt like this was another season of improvement, but there's still a lot to go to get to where they want to be.
What happened during the month of November? It seems like the wheels kind of really fell off there towards the end of the season. You guys were rolling pretty well, about 6-2 at that point. But here we go into November, and a lot of things happened. What happened during that month of November?
Yeah, the big turning point was they had a November 1st home game against USC, and they had a blackout theme that night, and they're leading by 8 points in the third quarter, and they have the ball, and Dylan Raiola drops back, he gets sacked, he breaks his leg on the play, and Nebraska goes on to lose the game. And that was a major turning point in the season. That kind of was a game you felt like they had a pretty good chance to win, if not for that injury, and then things could have gone a lot differently. But they follow that up, they go to UCLA and beat, what's quite honestly been a bad Bruins team this year. And then really the thing that I think a lot of fans worried about all year was how would Nebraska hold up on the line of scrimmage, especially on the defensive side. And they played in their last two games, Penn State and Iowa, who were just able to assert their dominance. And that's kind of where that went. And, like I mentioned earlier, they've since fired their defensive line coach, made a change at defensive coordinator, and that's been the one non-negotiable in this Matt Rhule era is they can tolerate mistakes, but they can't tolerate a lack of physicality and a lack of toughness, and that's really what happened over those last two games. Iowa's been a team that's held down Nebraska for the last decade plus, and that happened again. And I think you saw the sense of urgency with some of the moves since that point. But the month of November has been a real struggle for Nebraska for a long time. That predates the Matt Rhule era by quite a few years. Yeah. So they're still trying to figure that thing out. It hasn't happened yet, but that's quite honestly what they want to be is what Utah is. They want to be defined by what they do on the line of scrimmage, and then you kind of figure things out from there, and they just haven't gotten to that point yet.
I covered a game between BYU and Nebraska, I guess it was 2016 maybe, and going to Memorial Stadium was like one of those checklist things for a guy who loved watching football growing up and covered it and now works kind of in this industry, and it was just one of those places that I was in awe of, 90,000 strong there. Matt Rhule extends, and he was part of that conversation of the possibility of maybe going back to Penn State, all that stuff. But the reaction of Nebraska saying, hey, we want you to stay here, obviously they want him there. Then or at least they feel like he could take them to a place that they haven't been. And I don't think anybody is going to go, well, you just have to get us back to Tom Osborne levels and you'll be fine. I mean, that's a lot to ask of a guy. But what is Matt Rhule's? How is he approaching the community? What do people think of him? And obviously the athletic department believes he can bring success to this program long term.
Yeah, I mean, he's been great as a CEO, as a big picture visionary type. And Nebraska has given him everything that he wants, whether that's plans to, have grass practice fields, to some of the nutrition things. They want to be the best, have the best training table in the country in terms of the meals that they provide. There's a brand new facility with, strength training and things that are top of the line. But I think with Rhule, like, he's a guy who loves the community. That's a big part of it. And he's comfortable going out and representing the brand. I mean, he'll go on the Pat McAfee show on ESPN, and he'll have his own podcast. And he does these things not to self-promote. I really believe it's to put Nebraska out there. And you contrast that with a long line of head coaches at Nebraska who haven't gotten it done. And he's a breath of fresh air. When you think back to the Scott Frost era or the Mike Riley era, Bo Pelini before that, they all had different ways that they, I think, were uncomfortable in Lincoln, in kind of the center of the spotlight. And, Matt Rhule's a guy who's East Coast tough, who's been an NFL head coach, and I think has kind of found his calling in college. And quite honestly, his strengths, in my opinion, are more valuable in today's college football than they would have been even 10 years ago, when you're talking about re-recruiting your roster every year and igniting a fan base and just doing a lot of the things that you didn't have to do back then. So I think he's very much ingratiated himself to the fan base. They've won they've shown improvement every year. They went 5-7 in his first year, 6-6 last year, 7-5 now. So it hasn't been Curt Cignetti explosion like you've seen at Indiana, but there has been a steady progression that I think fans appreciate. They haven't been to consecutive bowl games in more than a decade, so there is progress when you look at what's going on. I just think the way the season ended, fans were looking for a little bit more this year. The schedule lined up for a little bit more this year. And ultimately, I think they're still happy with the progress that's been made. They just wish it would have been a little more.
So what has the vibe been like with I don't even know if this is possible for you to understand or no, just the recruiting aspect, right? With Raiola going into the transfer portal, my other question was, what was the vibe like when the Penn State thing with Matt Rhule earlier this season was going on? But how has the recruiting been affected? I know that Matt Rhule wants to improve this program. You talked about nutrition. You talked about, the grass fields and stuff like that, and understanding exactly what the program needs. But what is the conversations like with bringing in new talent?
Well, I think it does start with Dylan Raiola. I mean, he was a guy when he committed a couple years ago as a 5-star who had been committed to Ohio State, to Georgia. Like, he made it okay for the other top talent in the country to consider Nebraska. Like, that got a lot of people's attention. And ultimately, there was some talent that followed him, probably not as much as maybe he anticipated or Nebraska anticipated. But I do think this upcoming offseason is going to be very telling, as it will be at a lot of schools, because for the first time it's about revenue sharing, and it's not just pay-for-play NIL, which is what we've seen the last few years. And that's been an area where Nebraska has not been at the level of a lot of the other fellow blue bloods in the sport. And so it feels like really for the first time since in this transfer era that they're on equal ground in terms of the financial piece of what goes into this. And so we're going to see how that translates necessarily, but that's a really interesting part. And then, I mentioned the facilities are brand new. The fan support is top 2% in college football when you talk about the consecutive sellout streak back to the 1960s and how that can translate to true NIL and these different things. So they're very much trying to operationalize a lot of these things that have been assets for Nebraska in the past. And, if you go to Las Vegas and you look good against a Utah team that you're a big underdog against, I think that could get some attention as well. But, ultimately, players want to go places where they're in the college football playoff and they're playing meaningful football games in November. Right. Nebraska's sort of getting there. It's not to the point where they want to be, but I do think the things, all the pieces around the program are in place for them to succeed. It just hasn't happened with that big season that's allowed things to take off.
One of the things, obviously, preparing for this game, we always have to guess. Now, if it's not a college football playoff matchup, it seems like these teams, you got to figure out what their motivation level is. But with the Kyle Whittingham team, and now with him stepping away, they announced, of course, that Morgan Scalley's going to be the head coach, but he's going to be they're going to both be on that sideline roaming. It might be for the last time ever for Kyle Whittingham, certainly as a head coach. What is the Nebraska fan base and kind of everybody else looking on from the outside looking into Utah? What do they think of this Utah program, and what do they think about what this team is that they're going to be facing off against in Las Vegas?
A ton of respect. I mean, truly, like, Utah plays the way that I think Nebraska fans ache to return to. Like, when you think about the best Nebraska football teams, when they win 3 titles in the 90s and, they're playing for a national title, and as recently as 2001, like, those teams were defined by their lines of scrimmage and their toughness and just the style of play. And I think there's been a high level of respect for how Utah goes about its business in that regard. Like I mentioned, both lines of scrimmage being dominant pieces. Nebraska would kill to have 2 tackles being high NFL draft picks. Like, that's just not something that they've seen in a long time. And so
good news is they don't have to face them in the bowl game.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I just think the style of play that Utah has, the style of the culture that Kyle Whittingham's put there, Nebraska fans respect that. Probably the Big Ten comparison would have been Wisconsin until the last couple of years. But Nebraska, like, game recognizes game, right? Like, that's kind of something that I think Nebraska fans are excited about. And quite honestly, that's the reason why I think there's not a ton of optimism that Nebraska is going to be able to hang in this game, because I think there's a belief locally in Lincoln that the Utah program is just so rock solid that they're going to be able to plug and play with whoever's next at tackle. And they're so confident in their identity and how they go about their business. Whereas, Nebraska now is getting ready for its 3rd defensive coordinator in 4 years. And they're kind of trying to figure out what they do well and how they go about things. So I think Utah's been in a place where Nebraska wants to be, with continuity, toughness, identity, and it's going to be really interesting to see those 2 programs clash on that 31st.
Yeah, I mean, my last question is kind of, wrapped around all of that. I definitely understand where you stand and where Nebraska wants to be, but I'm always intrigued when they have new coaching staffs and new people in and how they want to preach and bring people in, right? Like, what is Nebraska? Has Nebraska said anything about how they plan to get these guys to understand the new coaching just for this one game, right? The new defensive coordinator, defensive line. You guys are giving up over 200 yards rushing in the month of November, and that's Utah's bread and butter. How are Nebraska talking about navigating around that?
Well, it's sort of a transitional time. So the defensive coordinator for this game is not their new hire, Rob Orich. It's a guy who's been an associate head coach. Phil Snow is his name. He was Matt Rhule's DC for the first 10 years of his head coaching career. So he's the one leading the charge in this game. And part of the reason they made the change was they felt like defensively they weren't getting enough, maybe emotional amping, like the players just weren't ready emotionally or weren't all that prepared. So Phil Snow's been a guy throughout his career who has done that. So it'll be interesting to see how things change in that regard. And then actually today, Matt Rhule had a press conference, and he's sort of seen the light recently in terms of now he's working with the defensive line, which is something he hasn't done much at all in his time at Nebraska. Like his whole thing lately has been when his hat's on backward, he's Matt. He's not Coach Rhule. He's Matt. He's the guy who's going to get in there and be a defensive line coach. Yeah. So I think the players have felt like that's made a difference in the last couple of weeks too. So to me, that's, I think, one of the fascinating pieces to watch is you're largely going to see the same Nebraska team that you saw in November. But if some of these changes have taken effect, you'll probably see a team that's a little bit more motivated, probably more sure of itself in terms of where it needs to be and how it goes about its business. So I think that's fascinating, like to see the value of enthusiasm, motivation, energy, whatever you want to call it. It does seem like they feel like they need to sort of acquit themselves to what happened against Penn State and Iowa. And I think there's a sense that they realize they're a big underdog in this game. And in a way that can kind of free them up to do what they do. Not that it's necessarily going to work, but I do think you're going to see a team that's a little bit more motivated and energetic than you saw down the stretch.
Evan Bland, he covers Nebraska football for the Omaha World-Herald. Evan, appreciate it. Obviously a New Year's Eve game in Las Vegas. Looking forward to it, and thanks for hanging out with us, man.
Appreciate you guys. Yep. Take care.
There you go. All right.